Welcome to Fort Qu'appelle. This small town in southern Saskatchewan is located in the Qu'appelle Valley, 70 kilometers northeast of Regina, between Echo Lake and Mission Lakes, and it's often confused with the nearby town called Qu'appelle. Coming into the Qu'appelle Valley, visitors are welcomed by a sign in the shape of a trading post. This tells one story of this town, but another story is told by looking deeper into the roots of this community. A story that plays a significant role in the development of our modern-day southern Saskatchewan lands, as this is where, over 140 years ago, Treaty 4 was signed. Today, I would like to take you on a journey. A journey through a history both told and retold. You will have a chance to see and hear different viewpoints of the history and the conflicts of history that are told on this land here in the Qu'appelle Valley. What I ask of you today is to keep your eyes and ears open to the stories that are represented or are pushed aside here on this land. And I ask you to think about how this has shaped this place and our understanding of the lands we live on. Even if you have directly been to or have connected with this land, or perhaps not, I ask you to think deeply and critically and ask yourself whose story is told on this land, and what does this experience with the land or experiences like it have to do with us as treaty people. Let's start in the downtown of modern-day Fort Qu'appelle. Now, Fort Qu'appelle didn't always look this way. The Hudson's Bay Company building that you see here has been called a foundational piece of this town's history, and therefore it has been labeled as a provincial heritage property. But why is such a building as this so important to this town's history? In 1864, the Hudson's Bay Company built a post on the site of the present Fort Qu'appelle. Trails and routes of commerce of the day passed through Fort Qu'appelle, serving the southern half of the territory. With the arrival of settlers and the passing from the scene, the Hudson's Bay Company changed its direction from the supply and fur trade to real estate and stores, and in 1884 went outside the fort to build the first general store. Then, in 1897, the Hudson's Bay store was built on its present site. The company built a new brick and stone sales shop to the southeast of the fort. It is located on the corner of Broadway Street and Company Avenue. The Bay continued its business here until approximately 1919, when it sold out to a company composed of a few local men who called the business the Pioneer Stores. The structure is the oldest known Hudson's Bay Company store in Canada still standing. The building was officially declared a provincial heritage property on November 8, 1983. A plaque unveiling ceremony was held at the Hudson's Bay Store Mall on June 24, 1988.
Hudson's Bay Company Store. This building represents the transition of the Hudson's Bay Company from a fur trading operation to a retail merchandising business. Built in 1897 under the direction of Chief Factor Archibald MacDonald, it captured most of the trade on the north side of the Qu'appelle Valley. MacDonald oversaw its operation for 14 of the 20 years that the Bay owned the store. In 1917, the company sold it to Pioneer General Stores, which ran it until 1970. The province bought the building in 1975 and undertook considerable stabilization. The store was sold to Jim Chaplin in 1985 and restored for commercial use. Government of Saskatchewan.
Historical building, and they tell a particular story. And so ask yourself what story is being told with a plaque like this, or even when we were inside the building and I said things like, this is a famous office upstairs. There's this famous office, according to Connie, who let us in the building. So local stories are told about this building and the significance of this building in this space. Whose story is told?
Now I ask, is there a need to commemorate a company which today can be found in large shopping centers throughout Canada? I'll let you decide for yourself. A similar story is told in other parts of this town, as we look at the commemorative Legion building with a large mural spread across its side, or the various plaques outside buildings that tell stories of settlers who have lived within them, as well as their accomplishments or contributions to this town. By looking at these buildings, I wonder whose story is being told and whose may not be told, and how does it connect to our understanding of the land here? Next, let our attention be directed towards another part of town called Historic Point of Interest Number 3, more commonly known as Treaty Park. This small area of planted grass is home to a large stone chalice, commemorating the event of signing Treaty 4, as well as those who were involved.
This monument was erected in 1915 by the Western Art Association's Saskatchewan branch to commemorate the first treaty between the Indians of the Northwest Territories and Queen Victoria, represented by her commissioners, the Honourable Alex Morris, Lieutenant Governor, Northwest Territories Honourable David Laird, Indian Commissioner, and W.J. Christie at Fort Qu'appelle, September 15, 1874, known as the Qu'appelle Treaty, and whereby the Indian chiefs ceded all their rights and titles and privileges to all lands wheresoever situated within Her Majesty's Northwest Territories to Her Majesty the Queen and her successors forever.
At Fort Qu'appelle, September 8, 1875, J. Chuck witnesses William S. McKay, William Wagner, A. MacDonald, Pascal Breland. At Fort Qu'appelle, September 9, 1875, Waype Makwa, Okans, Peapot, Le Croupe de Pheasant, Kitchi Ka Miwin. Witnesses Charles Pratt, A. MacDonald, Joss Reeder, Pascal Breland.
And when we read this, what is the spirit and intent of the statue and of like the wording that Jason just read? Like, who is it for?
Well, I was going to say this whole statue is a very colonial thing, right? It's here to mark territory that's been taken or claimed or settled.
Yeah. And what is the intent of treaty when we read that? To take, yeah.
But our understanding of treaty now is very different, and we've learned that it's supposed to be a mutual beneficial agreement and not just a one-sided agreement. But the statue is clearly like depicting what our lives are, and it's still very one-sided.
I think like when I think about when I grew up, this is very much the idea of treaty that I had, like that we take, we're here, the past doesn't matter.
Robin made mention that it is a big white statue, but I feel we forget that a lot of the values from the Western Europeans is very patriarchal, and herein lies like a big phallus on treaty land to represent that.
We were even just talking about how something so significant with the Treaty 4 signing being where it was, and then we just put a golf course on it as if there was absolutely no significance or importance to it. And we were even talking before about some of the other things that are like seen as historic sites and so important to who we are as Canadians, yet we're just willing to kind of throw a golf course on a significant piece of land, and just kind of shows where our perspectives and values are.
Yeah, so it's what story is told by putting that golf course there. It's this ceded all their rights, titles, privileges. The story is that we can do whatever it is that Europeans want to do in that space, and we want to erase First Nations in that space, so that's why there's a golf course there. That's the story. that we wanted to erase that. Perhaps we don't want that anymore as this group, but the common sense story of our nation is to erase the significance of treaty, for sure.
Looking at this large stone monument that stands out like a sore thumb in nature, I'm curious to think, what story is told here? Whose story is viewed as important and whose story has been overlooked or left out? Now from here, let's take a journey to another structure found in many communities in Canada, just like Fort Qu'appelle. This is the local museum. Within these walls are thousands of artifacts, collected and archived to be showcased to visitors and community members who are curious to learn about the past of this community. This small building has a diverse wealth of artifacts. However, one story stands out more than any other. Whose story is told here? What is the purpose of keeping these items if they no longer hold a functional purpose for our survival? Through exploring what is within these walls, another voice seems to be hushed or pushed aside. But I know I wouldn't be doing my duty as a treaty person if I did not point out these voices.
Entered into between you and your great mother. I advise you to disperse to your homes, enjoy your son and your nation's community, taking our lives with your desire to the Queen, though she may think to adopt civilized habits, has no idea of compelling you to do so. Does she need to the right one?
Wow.
Interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's kind of like, it's like explained as a story.
Is it the signing of treaty, or is it like the document treaty?
It's kind of both, I think.
Probably the experiences and things that were happening.
Yeah.
What an interesting way to explain an agreement.
Yeah, because it's like, even like reading like a few sentences, like it's hard to like read.
So was it specifically for...
Various items collected in this museum come from the personal belonging of Indigenous peoples who have lived on or continue to live on this land here in Fort Qu'appelle. Earlier, we looked at the Treaty Park Monument, where, similar to the museum, voices of Indigenous peoples of the area were underrepresented. What view of Indigenous peoples are portrayed through these stories that are told at Treaty Park and the museum? Let's take a look at a monument that tells a different story than the one at Treaty Park. The Indian man is praying to the Great Spirit for allowing him to take the golden eagle for ceremonial purposes. In this manner, he demonstrates a great reverence for the environment and a realization that man should be as one with nature.
In September 1874, at this place, Indian nations of the southern prairies met the Queen's commissioners to make a treaty. Cree, Saulteaux, and Assiniboine nations held this land from the Great Spirit. Here, they had long supported themselves, had their own governments, traded, and made alliances.
In exchange for solemn promises, they agreed to share this land with the newcomers. This was done in peace. This plaque was set up in 1987 by the chiefs of Indian nations signatory to the treaty to reaffirm their commitment to the spirit and intent of Treaty 4.
This commemorative monument was commissioned by the Touchwood File Hills Qu'appelle district chiefs in honor of the Cree Soto and Assiniboine Indians known to be buried here. In May of 1985, the TFHQ-DCC secured through the Court of Queen's Bench legal custody of the Memorial Cemetery. The deceased are believed to have passed away during treaty negotiations between 1874 and 1890.
How is the story that is told in this monument different than the one told in Treaty Park? How is this monument a piece of reconciliation or a step towards reconciliation? With these two monuments that tell very different stories, is there a need to keep one and destroy another, or can they both peacefully exist in the same community here in Fort Qu'appelle? Throughout years of colonization, many things impacted Indigenous peoples' culture and way of life. A major process that impacted various groups of Indigenous peoples across Canada was the process of assimilation. One of the tools that was used to assimilate Indigenous children into the European way of life was residential schools. The goal of a residential school was to take the Indian out of the child. Let's take a journey about 7 kilometers east of Fort Qu'appelle, where you will find the village of Lebret. This small community has its own history that is greatly impacted today by the stories that are told here. One history of this land includes the story of a Roman Catholic missionary, Bishop Take, who in 1841 arrived at the edge of the valley today known as the Qu'appelle Valley. Later, he decided to create a mission here to spread Christianity to those who already lived in the area. Today, symbols of this are still evident in the small community of Lebret, as in 1871, crosses were erected on the edge of the valley where the bishop first arrived. Furthermore, these crosses overlook the large stone church that sits at the bottom of the valley next to Mission Lake. These monuments stand strong in the middle of the small village of Lebret. However, another story is told, only a few hundred yards away, where the remains of the Qu'appelle Indian School lie. This institution said their aim was to form boys and girls, or the men and women of tomorrow, who will have the ability and the willingness to profit by widening their experience in all spheres where knowledge may be gained and skills developed. They seek to provide activities that will develop the child's physical, intellectual, emotional, social, and spiritual life to enable him to enjoy and appreciate health and healthy living later on, to live helpfully with his associates, to find joy in giving his best to any work, to acquire knowledge, to practice daily the simple virtues. This comes from a document created by Sister Moreau, one of the nuns at the Lebret Indian School, or the Qu'appelle Indian School. Even though the school was rebuilt and restructured multiple times, the Lebret Indian School officially opened its doors in 1884. In October 1973, the school was signed over to a First Nations school board, and it eventually became known as the White Calf Collegiate. The school remained open until closing its doors in 1998. Life speaker Lindsay Starr recounted his experiences attending the school, as well as how it impacted him and his family.
We had a missionary roommates, fathers and ones that were here that looked after us. he lived on a schedule daily, from morning to night, every day. That was like 7 o'clock, get up, take care of your bed, wash up, line up, come downstairs, come to the prayer room, you'll go in there, you're expected grade line or something like that. So he said prayer, proceeded into the dining rooms. We had 3 dining rooms at that time. The main dining room, then we had the girls' dining room, then we had the younger ones. So after each meal, we also said prayer. We did a little praying every day. So it became a routine for us.
Even though a group of young adults stood around and respectfully listened to Lindsay's stories, strong winds and a loud fan stopped many from hearing Lindsay's soft-spoken words. Even though his message could not be fully heard, his presence, as he told his story, showed that there are many stories here on this land that need to be told. What stories are told in this small village? How does this impact the lives of Indigenous and non-Indigenous peoples in this area? And how does this connect to reconciliation? From Lebret, let's travel across Mission Lake to the All Nations Healing Center. This center focuses on restoring traditional ceremonies such as sweat lodges and traditional medicines and other healing practices that many Indigenous communities used before the signing of Treaty 4. In the creation of this film, it was torn as I thought I needed to have footage of every part of this journey to document and share. However, there are no words to describe the All Nation Healing Center. Now, some may think I am intentionally leaving this story out of this film. However, I do so out of respect and not ignorance. I would encourage anyone who would like to know more to visit, as you are not truly able to appreciate ceremonies and practices until you learn more about them authentically. The journey does not end here. We must take it in our own hearts to go further towards reconciliation. This could be in the form of learning more about Indigenous worldviews and life stories, or simply opening our eyes and our minds up to the stories told or hidden around us. But we are not alone on this journey. Reconciliation can take place in many different places, in a classroom, at a ceremony, visiting new people, or even in a back alley behind an old residential school. We are all treaty people, and we must take an active role in creating reconciliation. As Canadians, we are proud of the land that we live on. However, we need to be aware of the single-sided stories we have been told about our history. So where do we go from here? Well, let me leave you with a few ideas that you can take up as you please, or come up with your own. Why not learn about the land around you by engaging in activities like the blanket exercise, which tell the story of the true history of Canada? Or take some time to sit back, relax, practice stillness, and become aware of the land in which you live on. Maybe you could be critical about the information you hear in media and the single-sided stories that you are told. You could start embracing the feeling of being uncomfortable, because reconciliation will not be a comfortable act. Or you could never stop learning or unlearning about the world around us. May we go forward in our lives with the spirit and intent of treaties in our hearts, and never forget that as long as the sun shines, grasses grows, and rivers flow, We are all treaty people. Until next time.